we're facing a moment that's so critical, and we can't mess it up. It's all happening. There's 7 billion people are looking towards us.
Welcome to The Future We Want, a podcast for rebellious leaders ready to get to work, do the work, and create the future we want. I'm Raphael Bemporad, founding partner of BBMG, a branding and social impact agency that works with leaders that won't wait on things that can't wait. On today's episode, I'm joined by my dear friend and BBMG's Futurist in residence, Sanjay Khanna. Sanjay co-authored the introduction from our new report, Leading Regenerative Brands, and he and I will share headlines from our latest global research with GlobeScan and explore 5 paradigm shifts to help brand leaders thrive in a world in flux.
On both sides of the power differential, if care isn't the outcome, things haven't equalized themselves.
We'll also share highlights from our conversations with an amazing community of youth activists, issue experts, brand leaders, and elders who bring their distinct perspectives to the moment we're in and help show the way toward the future we might all want to be part of. So thanks for tuning in, and let's get to it. Hey, Sanjay, welcome. It is so good to see you.
Raphael, it's great to be here.
We are really delighted to be together. And, we met a few years back on a responsible business Zoom call. And I want to shout out to Mark Spears and Laura Tufariello for bringing us together, because I remember so vividly in that moment we found ourselves completing each other's sentences. And immediately it was so clear to me, like we are kindred spirits and we share so many values, so many aspirations for our work, for our kids, for our future. And since then, you have joined BBMG as our Futurist in residence. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So thank you for that. Welcome, Sanjay.
Well, thanks, and whoop, whoop, whoop back at you. It's wonderful to be here and to think with you about how we use futures thinking to help brands meet this moment and the moments to come.
Well, before we dive into the story of our Leading Regenerative Brands report, I just think it'd be great for our audience if you don't mind just sharing, what does it mean to be a futurist? What is that all about?
So as a futurist, what I do with that is collaborate with clients and their stakeholders to explore plausible scenarios that may emerge over a defined time horizon, the next year to a decade from now, and then to use that to help individuals, organizations, and communities develop resiliency by reframing strategy in light of the climate crisis, human health, technological change, and more. In fact, a lot of the issues that came up in the Regenerative Brands report, and that intergenerational justice falls into that, of course, as well.
That is so exciting, Sanjay, and exactly, like with your help, BBMG and GlobeScan recently released a report called Leading Regenerative Brands. And our aspiration was to really frame 5 paradigm shifts that are happening and are necessary to thrive in a world in flux. And we're definitely all feeling the swirl right now. And my dear friend Laura Galinsky, who works at the organization unfinished.com, likes to talk about being in a liminal space. And I looked it up, and liminal means being in a transitional or initial stage of a process, or occupying a position on both sides of a boundary or threshold. And I really love that, because I feel like we are definitely living in a liminal moment, in a transitional phase and at both sides of a boundary or a threshold. And one of my favorite authors and philosophers who I've talked about on the podcast before is Charles Eisenstein. And he talks about being in the space between stories, that, we are maybe 100 years into the industrial, now increasingly a global economy. And the stories that we've built to tell ourselves about ourselves no longer are serving us. And yet the stories that we need and that can nourish us in a future that's emerging don't yet exist. And so we're in this tender moment in the space in between. And I find that thinking that we are in a liminal life right now, in the space in between, it's both recognizing all of the challenges that we're living through, but it also feels like a moment of possibilities, of potentialities. And that's also very exciting. In our introduction, Sanjay, you share that as humans, we face new frontiers bravely and uneasily. And I'm really intrigued by that juxtaposition. Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Well, I think it speaks to the liminal moment you talked about earlier, that we're at this boundary and can see both sides of it, both the past where certain social progress has been made but could be undone if society evolves in certain ways. We can see certain aspects of the threatening future ahead of us, and we don't know how it's going to play out or how we might adapt and respond to it. Brands don't know that. Their consumers don't know that. Companies don't know that. Government doesn't know that. So the coming together of and interrelationships among crises such as climate change, socioeconomic inequality, technological change, geopolitical conflict, and decreasing physical and mental well-being, so the health piece that's so important, means that we're at a time of declining health, cohesion, and trust. And that's a world where anxiety predominates. No matter who you are, it's in the background of people's minds, even if it's hidden when people put a brave face on their experiences in, social settings and professional settings and on social media. So we're brave and uneasy as these new, often less happy frontiers confront us. This leaves us with a lot of work to do to build bridges, to engender trust, and to nurture friendship and community as a core part of the way forward. It also does open up wonderful possibilities, and purpose-led brands can be a key part of what I call a social transition. So as we talk about, climate transition and decarbonization and all the issues that could emerge with that, we also have to think about the social transition and how we transition from where we are today to what might be a more challenging future from a societal perspective, from a human health perspective, from an intergenerational justice perspective. And brands are right now in the middle of social transition that they have to navigate very skillfully.
I hear you exactly, because I remember a conversation I had with Bill McDonough recently where he was talking about the transitions and the transformations happening in the biosphere, rooted in nature, the technosphere, rooted in technology and the mechanics of business and the materials that come from what we design. And then he added the ethnosphere, which was rooted in culture. And that it's all three of these dynamics now that we are integrating into like our new understanding of the world that we're in, but also what we're hoping to design and to create and navigate together. Well, amen to that.
Yeah, and picking up on that piece about the ethnosphere, there's an ethnobotanist named Wade Davis, who is a National Geographic Explorer in Residence, and he's written a lot about the ethnosphere and the many diverse cultures and ontologies and ways of thinking and seeing that can be lost in the transition in terms of a loss of biocultural and linguistic diversity in how we see problems and how we see challenges. And this really builds in with Indigenous ways of knowing and other sorts of concepts that have come up in the Regenerative Brands report. So I find that really intriguing as well, the connection between McDonough and Davis, and also this being really the central issue is that everything happens within a culture.
Exactly. I agree. And with that in mind, I'm curious, as we're thinking about leading regenerative brands and as we dive into the themes, the stories, and the voices from our report, why might brand leaders and humans generally embrace a regenerative mindset? What does that even mean to you to think regeneratively, to embody a regenerative way?
That's a lovely, lovely question and a lovely framing. I mean, for me, embracing a regenerative mindset means understanding that thoughts that drive innovation are not neutral. And when I was working with Yamaha Motor Corporation way back in 2005 on the future of robotics and their work on what they were calling advanced automation, which is the coming together of computer vision and AI and mechanics and all these different things to create potentially new products and services, I had to emphasize that you had to embed ethics in the development of the product and service at its earliest inception. And that's what I mean by the thoughts that drive innovation are not neutral. Unless you think about unanticipated consequences as you're actually building. You can't capture things and make things regenerative and make sure they're robust. So they can build trust or weaken it. And these thoughts can drive desire in healthy, meaningful ways or in ways that corrode relationships. So baking pro-social values into brands is a key part of regenerating interpersonal, community, social, and brand environments. And I think looking at regenerative, not just in terms of, say, agriculture or these different fields or in regenerative business, but thinking about this and how do you regenerate social relationships? How do you create brands that help people build relationships, build trust, build cohesion? So doing all this is hard work. It's hard, meaningful, powerful work, and it does require bringing diverse minds and hearts together with purpose, which is what BBMG does, and which is why I'm so excited to join you as Futurist in Residence and to contribute in that way.
I think what you're naming is something that we've observed and have been appreciating for many years in the shift in culture and the shift in attitudes, beliefs, behavior, aspiration. And now as I sort of, turn toward thinking about what did we learn together on this journey of creating the report, we wanted to integrate the voices of young leadership and activists, of elders, of brand practitioners and professionals, of people from wildly different backgrounds and stories, all grappling with what is the moment we're in and how might we think about the future that we want, which has been the core idea and spark and inspiration for our podcast. And so as part of this report, we share findings from BBMG and GlobeScan's latest global study of over 30,000 people in 30 international markets. And for our work in particular, we asked young people under the age of 30 from all backgrounds and all walks of life to tell us about the issues that mattered most to them, to understand their visions of the future that they want, and how brands and business specifically might play a role in helping us regenerate our world. And what stood out to us this time and in this particular research was that young people are sharing a much more personal experience with the impacts of global issues than we have observed before, whether it's discrimination, whether it's climate change, whether it's equality, whether it's mental health. These are issues that perhaps in the past were someday in the future, some other place where I'm not living. And now these are issues that are being felt in their daily lives, in their own homes and communities and neighborhoods. And so as a consequence of these issues, not just being intellectual constructs, but rather deeply felt experiences, what we're hearing is that young people are growing in their impatience with incremental change as things around them they see sort of being fragile and falling apart. And what they're looking for is that brands bring perspective, leadership, energy, resources, influence to being part of the change that they seek. And so in this liminal space in between, and with this great turning that Joanna Macy invites us to, and I love Joanna Macy, I highly recommend her book, Act of Hope, we turn to young people, elders, brand leaders, organizational development experts, and regenerative designers to understand what is this moment we're in and where do we go from here. And in these conversations, we identified 5 paradigm shifts for how we might think about power, space, time, leadership, our relationships to one another and to the planet, and what it might mean to help guide, to help lead, to help build regenerative brands today. So Sanjay, let's dive in and hear directly from some of the folks that we're learning from and with on this journey, starting with our relationship to power. So power is obviously a big and deep conversation, whether we're thinking about the legacy of colonialism, slavery, white supremacy. We are trapped in systems of hierarchy and centralized power at the top that has had devastating consequences for people and for the planet. now for centuries. And what we're observing and hearing from our voices in the study is that decentralized design, distributed leadership are increasingly emerging as ways to shift power dynamics, to shift decision-making authority, to increase access, and ultimately to unleash participation that happens from the ground up. We spoke with Lorna Davis, who is one of my favorite human beings and an inspiration in my life. She, as many may know, served as CEO of Danone USA, the yogurt company in North America. She is now a global ambassador for B corporations. And I've also connected to her in her new role as steward of the Fire Circle community. And in that organization, she helps emerging business leaders learn from respected elders in indigenous Eastern and Western cultures and embrace ancient and vital approaches to creating change. And here's what she shared with us about the shift that's happening from a paradigm of power over to what's emerging as power with.
I think two of the big misunderstandings about business are that it goes from the top down and from the inside out, where actually it goes from the bottom up and the outside in. So once you genuinely see that the only people that matter in your organization are actually at the bottom of the traditional power structure, then that will probably inspire you to do some different things around how you organize your business. That might lead you to different kind of remuneration structures, different kind of assessment structures, whatever. And the same is true from the outside in. If you think that you are an enterprise that is disconnected from everything that's around you, well, you obviously do stupid things. And so I think once you operate from this space, different things make sense to you. You start to do things differently. And so, baby steps for people running businesses is partner with your customers and your suppliers. Partner with them, period. Baby steps. Understand exactly who the human beings are in your business and get the most diverse group of people to tell you what they think about things and help them have some kind of power sharing arrangement with them.
So, Sanjay, what does the shift from power over to power with mean to you?
Well, for me, it means an acceptance, and I hope a humble acceptance that we're intergenerationally co-responsible for encouraging self-worth, dignifying human and all life, and honoring younger generations' aspirations for healthy and fulfilling lives on a habitable planet, as well as older generations' desire to help younger generations with that work and to stand with them and beside them as we move forward into addressing the challenging background circumstances. Sir Johnny Ive, who was the chief design officer at Apple, uses different language than we use, but he talks about designing and developing things with care and to have embodied care in the product or the service or the solution or the brand. So to me, that's another nice way of thinking about, power over and power with, which is on both sides of the power differential. If care isn't the outcome, then things haven't equalized themselves.
Exactly as you're sharing and Lorna is sharing with us, this is a moment where the entire hierarchy is shifting, and what we bring to it on all sides of the dynamic is one, I think, as you're naming, where we bring humility, appreciation, and also deep respect from the perspective, the experience, the wisdom, the beauty of the other in all circumstances. Cool. Well, the second paradigm shift that we talk about in our conversation is our connection to space and to place in our lives. And for the last half century, at least, globalization has pushed manufacturing elsewhere, customer service elsewhere, our sourcing elsewhere, all in the name of maximizing efficiency and profit. But as the distance between nodes and how we make, sell, and consume stretches, the more opportunities arise for exploitation of people and of nature. Out of sight, out of mind. And I think one of the things that happened during the pandemic is it reacquainted us with the immediate areas in which we live. We were working from home and are still helping out in small circles and hanging out in small circles, shopping and sourcing locally. And as we shift our perspective from over there to right here, it's our opportunity to cultivate what author Jenny Odell calls placefulness. And I love that word, placefulness. And what she describes placefulness as is a cultivation of a sensitivity for and responsibility to the historical, which is what happened here, and the ecological, what or who lives or lived here. And as part of our conversations, we had the opportunity to speak with many young people who are working at the intersection of climate change and social and racial justice. Alexis Saenz, goes by Lex, and Yulu Fuentes work together as part of the International Indigenous Youth Council in Los Angeles. And they reinforce this deep connection to place in their sense of both personal identity and their experience of community, with very profound implications for brands. Here's what Yulu shared with us. How would you describe your path to activism or organizing? What led you to become an organizer and an activist?
Definitely lived experience. The community I lived in was like low income, working class, migrant communities, and having the struggles of surviving under the system of capitalism with limited resources, limited education, and limited time. The traumas that my parents carried through their migration story, through the turbulent events of that in history, are connected to like U.S. intervention and war and like having learned about those things through trying to understand like my family's background really made me aware of economic injustice, racial inequality, colonialism and imperialism, and like all while living, like I grew up in this neighborhood that was like, it was working class communities, but then the next neighborhood past the freeway was like more affluent and white, and like noticing the differences between like how sanitation and utilities were like upkeeping more on that neighborhood versus our neighborhood, and noticing that police were more present in our neighborhood versus their neighborhood, and going to an affluent white school and like experiencing microaggressions and racism from my peers, and like feeling like I just had the short end of the stick. Like there's already preconceived notions of who I am and who I'm supposed to be and who my family is and what they're supposed to be. And there's no acknowledgement of the trauma, the experience of living in poverty, the traumas of like having to migrate, and the fact that there's limited resources for us to even advance. And so all of that was just like, I just felt like it was so unfair for me and my community. And I wanted to advocate for my community.
And building on Yulu's life experience, here's their advice for brands.
Your business is beyond your profit, because it's not just for your gain. And you have to ensure that it's for the good of other people, of not even just your immediate community either. All around, it has to be equitable. It has to be fair to and consensual to the land that you source your resources from, the people that you engage in relation to receive resources from. Like the whole process has to be equitable. And taking into account there needs to be room for regeneration of the land and people's energy too. Mm-hmm. That it's not just, we have to make sure that the earth is okay, but we have to make sure that the people are okay too, and that it's sustainable in that way. Localizing where you source your products, I feel like is like the biggest thing, because when we talk about like this environmental catastrophe, the fossil fuel, the extraction in shipping things, in gathering things, and monocultural agriculture is profound. I can't even describe it. Even packaging. And packaging can be solved through localizing your resources. Like, you don't need packaging if what you're bringing to your consumer is like not too far. So there's a lot of solution in localizing resources.
And Lorna reinforced exactly what Yulu is saying from her experience leading global businesses.
You know, in the old days, when I took over a global job, and I ran global businesses for 20 years, I would just get on a plane and go wherever the hell I needed to go to meet the humans. That's what I did. And I spent decades flying hundreds of flights a year to do what needed to be done. And that was what leadership was considered as. Global leadership was considered as. That's all changed. So the question of what is global and what makes sense to run globally is a really, really big question. Because I think on the flip side of the sort of consciousness about COVID and carbon and that influencing flying and traveling is this intense desire for humans to be together. I want to be with people who are like-minded. I want to feel safe and comfortable, and I want to lie on the couch with my foot on somebody's leg because I'm considering something that matters to me. And so I think that nobody's really talking about what this means, because we went to this big global thing and now we're like, fuck, what are we going to do now? If you have a look at what goes on in this country, you know, you take a liter of milk from some farmer in Vermont, you put it on a truck and you schlep it to some factory in Tennessee, you turn it into yogurt, and then you put it back on a truck and you send it to the Walmart warehouse in Texas, and they then take it and ship it from their DC to Florida. It's insane. It's insane. So the question of what do you do that makes sense globally, and how do you lead that without getting on a plane all the time? And then how do you ensure that actual humans are close to the sources of their food and close to each other is, for me, like, it's a huge thing. And I'm fascinated by how it plays out.
So Sanjay, Yulu and Lorna are really helping us think about what it means to be proximate, as Brian Stevenson has said, to the sources of our food, to our fellow human beings, and what it means ultimately to be placeful. So in your mind, in your experience, what does the shift from over there to right here mean to you?
The over there to right here dialogue is about a plausible future where right here is all there is. And in this scenario, the inherent pro-social value of local relationships in regenerating economies would be important, as would understanding hyper-local needs of people. From a grassroots perspective, local businesses and community-based organizations need to collaborate even more effectively to strengthen local commercial and cultural vitality where possible, including areas such as efficiency of transport and production supply chains. But ultimately, it's about strengthening the social in background circumstances that are harder, and how brands contribute to making those sentiments be ones that drive people's values-based behaviors is an important part of thinking through the emerging ecosystems of commercial and human relationships.
Sanjay, I absolutely love the idea that right here is all there is. Now, the third paradigm shift, which builds from this, is a paradigm shift rooted in our relationship with time. And I think we're all experiencing this. Everything in our culture just feels faster and faster and faster, and expectations are shifting to more instantaneous. But as the speed of decision-making, as our expectations for convenience, as we're driven by quarterly business results, trading happening in milliseconds, new fashion cycles every 6 weeks. But the race to instantaneous everything has significant shadows and unintended consequences, from undermining our relationships to overlooking the needs and realities of all those working to deliver more things to our doorsteps. And the problem is that we're increasingly burning out and experiencing the spiraling negative effects of short-term thinking, whether that's in our economy, our society, or in our politics. Another reason that I love Joanna Macy is that she invites us to consider a new relationship with time, what she references as deep time or ecological time. And what she invites is that we see our ancestors as allies in the present moment, as co-creators of the world we wish for our children and for future generations yet to come. And in our conversations with Aidan Liss and Dylan Gohill of Extinction Rebellion Youth in Los Angeles, they really underscored the tension between feelings of urgency in the moment and all that we face now, and legacy, what we've inherited and what we're leaving behind. And Dylan puts things quite bluntly, that he and many others in his generation are feeling this incredible sense of urgency and responsibility, and those things together can be totally overwhelming. Here's what he said. What words come to mind for you, Dylan, or feelings to describe the moment we're living in, the world we're living in today?
First, I wanted to say vomit, because I quite literally want to throw up right now, considering everything going on, regardless of climate change. We have so much going on. And I feel I read this poem the other day, that said, we're using an unprecedented use of unprecedented. And I feel like that really hit me, because it's so many new things are happening each day. We're facing the first or the hottest or the longest of everything going on each day. And so I think, as a young person, it's hard to think when I think and when I really take in everything going on, it's quite literally too much to handle. But I'd say for 5 words, I'd say all eyes are on us. We're facing a moment that's so critical, and we can't mess it up. It's all happening. There's 7 billion people are looking towards us.
Sanjay is a futurist. How do you think about our relationship, or the relationship between past, present, and future? How do we balance urgency and responsibility in our appreciation of this deeper sense of time?
Right now, we're seeing time compress. So, when I think about the past, present, future, I see them kind of colliding, coming together, compressing, so that past actions that have hurt people and degraded the environment, contributed to the climate crisis, collide with the present, speeding up the pace at which the future is coming towards us. All this makes the present the field of action to reduce harms and plant seeds of new regenerative approaches that can take root, nurturing a deeper sense of time, of continuity, because people don't just need disruption, which is something that's been sold to us. They need continuity and stability. That helps each individual to experience a sense of peace before re-entering the field of taking action to address the urgency of this moment of tremendous change affecting people and planet.
I really love that. I love the idea of appreciating how the past, present, and future are colliding, which does make us feel this anxiety, this speed, this dysregulation. But at the same time, the invitation to nurture this deeper sense of time, to be present in a different kind of way that allows us to find stability, peace, centeredness as we wade into action. And it's an incredibly deep and beautiful way of thinking about how we re-inhabit time together. The fourth paradigm shift is about leadership. And I think we're all increasingly recognizing that our current economic, social, and political systems are profoundly broken. And whatever the models and the skills and the tools that got us here are not the ones that are viable to get us where we want and where we need to go. And to truly seize this moment for transformation, it seems also clear that we have to shift our mindsets, the incentives, and our norms of leadership. And In this conversation, my friend Frederick Laloux speaks to this beautifully. He's the author of the absolutely fantastic book, Reinventing Organizations, that I highly recommend. And he's been at the forefront of thinking about how do we support transformations in people, in our organizations, in systems, and in cultures. And in our conversation about regenerative leadership, he invited us to almost flip our thinking on its head. And here's what he said, and I'll read his quote to us. As leaders, we are celebrated as problem solvers. And for many of us, it is uncomfortable, almost unbearably so, to be confronted with questions that force us to admit we don't have answers. The dissonance often compels us to ignore hard questions and focus solely on the ones we know how to solve. But then we have it upside down. The true sign of leadership, Frederick says, is our ability to sit with a hard question with no immediate answer, long enough until answers begin to emerge, as they almost always do. That to me is like such a beautiful invitation, because it allows us it gives us permission to say it's okay not to know. In fact, to welcome not knowing as a gift. Building on what Frederick is getting at, we've also had the opportunity to work alongside Hala Thomasdottir, who is the CEO and chief catalyst at the B Team. And just like Frederick, she is calling on us to embody a kind of self-awareness, humility, and courage that's ultimately required for transformational leadership. And here's what she shared with us.
And I actually wonder sometimes, Raphael, not about me or my team or my leaders even, but just about leaders in general. Do they have the capacity to meet a moment like this? I really feel like the three changes that have to happen simultaneously to meet this moment that is right in front of us is inside out transformation, bottoms up, unlocking that leader in everyone, and top down, because unless the system and those holders of the system come to the table, that there is no time to build new systems. So we have to also, so it's the existing power, the emerging power, and the insight power that I think all have to sort of come to this moment in my humble view. And I feel like the hardest part is the insight power. But I do feel like it's coming in many, and I think there's a lot more open. Like I make my TED talk about, we have the technologies, we have the money, we don't have the transformational leadership. And like we need to drop from our head to our heart in order to develop that.
So, Sanjay, building on what Hala is sharing, as humans, we are wired to seek out safety and comfort in the familiar. And yet so much of what we're hearing about regenerative leadership is that it's about sitting with discomfort, sitting with not knowing the answers, of loving the questions, as the poet Rainer Maria Rilke says, and finding our way forward through our lived experiences. So hearing Hala, hearing Frederick, what does regenerative leadership mean to you?
For me, and some of the things I've talked about today, they're sort of from my experience, but others are just from the many mentorships and others who've helped me sort of understand global change in the world, including traditional knowledge holders and others. And I just want to acknowledge that before I weigh into this question. So no matter how challenging things get, regenerative leadership means to think well, speak well, and act well in ways that honor life, relationships, and healthy potentialities and possibilities. And I remember hearing from Chief Oren Lyons, who's the faith keeper of the Onondaga Nation, a member of the Six Nations in upstate New York. And he said, this is a time of fire. And in a time of fire, who are you going to trust to lead you through the fire? So for me, regenerative leadership is also about being the kind of leader that people will trust to help facilitate, have these dialogues, and lead them through these challenging times ahead. Because leadership, and leadership of high integrity, is something I've been certainly taught, and it's been impressed upon me through these dialogues and mentorships that I've experienced in my work developing my foresight practice, is something that that is very necessary. It's very easy to talk about these things, but as the crises come, who are you going to trust to lead you, whether it's an individual or a brand?
Sanjay, what you're getting at is the perfect introduction to our fifth and final paradigm shift, which is really about relationship. And of the many lessons that we have learned these past few years together, one is a deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of all of life. And an uninvited virus spreads through a family gathering, a wedding party, a community celebration. A drought, flood, or wildfire in one part of the world affects food access in another. Daily acts of brutality and beauty find their way across our news feeds and force a hard look in the mirror, as well as an awakening, if we're lucky, of grace and gratitude. And so as we think about all these paradigm shifts, I think the one that sits at the heart of all others is relationship. And the question that we're facing now, which is whether we as a society live separate from one another or ultimately acknowledge, welcome, and embrace our fundamental interdependence, our mutual relationship. And so much of what we're hearing from elders and young people and brand leaders is based on this idea. When we widen the circle of connection to see ourselves not only as part of a family or an organization or community, but connected to the full web of life, we begin to see how our actions have ripple effects and relationships create absolutely glorious possibilities. One of the people who has been an extraordinary example to me, very much a mentor, Sanjay, in my own life, is Dave Rappaport, who's the Global Social Mission Officer at Ben & Jerry's. And as many know and have appreciated about the brand, they've really been working at the intersection of climate change and social justice. And what Dave is sharing is that he's recognizing, even from a business perspective, that we have to understand in all that we do, we don't act as islands on our own, but how everything is interconnected.
I think we have to embrace our interdependence and interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, to recognize that the individual is actually not the fundamental unit of life, that nothing exists apart from community.
I'm curious, as a brand selling ice cream, what role does the brand play in honoring what's underneath the surface, the latent, the tensions? Because it seems like from what you're saying, it's in part deliver joy in the experience while addressing the underlying conditions that allow for joy to be possible in the future.
Well, I think, obviously for us, it is that combination of joy and justice and the things we do that, in essence, create stories that people can feel good about becoming a part of when they buy our ice cream. The ways in which sort of being connected with that can help them build their own stories. And what I mean also is, like getting involved with activism through our fan-facing activism campaigns, we're helping people sort of touch a deeper level of something that is closer to, something meaningful. And in saying all this, I certainly, on a personal level, am not saying that there isn't something involved with, the joy of eating ice cream. But there is this way that we bring it together that I think is pretty powerful.
And in that spirit of what Dave is sharing, I'd like to conclude our conversation with what we heard from Yulu and Lex at the International Indigenous Youth Council in Los Angeles, as they capture for us, I think, the most beautiful expression of what it means to live in relationship as part of the future that they want. Here's what they said, starting with Yulu.
I think the way we even feel satisfied in our possessions, in our needs, I feel like that is going to be transforming. And I envision a reality where we take what we need and we make sure that we live to provide for the next generations, not just within our blood family, but also just greater community. and those that we are surrounded by?
I would say some of the words in the world that I want to see is like joy, just like, yeah, just joy, just happiness in being who you are, which also goes with embrace was another word, and being able to embrace who we are as multi-dimensional, multifaceted beings, and complex beings, because we are. Another word that comes up for me is understanding, being able to understand and empathize with others. And, that's going to be super important for our healing, and reciprocal, because everything needs to be reciprocated, like our relationships with ourselves, with each other, with the planet. Like, it all is reciprocal. It's not just a one-way street. So it's important to make sure we're pouring into our own cups. We're pouring into the cups of others, and for the earth as well, and the plants around us, and the sacred elements. And I think like something that you said, which is like take what you need, is like super important, because in most indigenous cultures, you'll see them like still like be in a time where they could, like, someone else may see like, oh, this person really needs something, but they'll be like, no, I'm good. Like, I may be sleeping on my family's floor, but like, I'm good. Give that bed or give that room to someone else. Like, what if we were all like that? Like, how much different would the world be?
Sanjay, as we're hearing from Lex, as we're hearing from Yulu, I think for all that we're naming and exploring here together, at the end of the day, this is a story of hope. This is a story of possibility. It is rooted absolutely in anxiety, in ambivalence, and challenge, and at the same time, thinking through our new relationship with power, with space, with time, with leadership, and with one another. We're inviting us to wade into something that's emergent, but also to create new possibilities together. And so what comes to mind for you as you sort of take all this in that gives you a sense of hope, that gives you a sense of possibility?
Certainly, Yulu and Lex's comments are very resonant for me, and they give me strength to keep doing what I'm doing in our practice together at BBMG. I especially think about Yulu's comments about how we live to provide for the next generation, not just within our own blood family, but also, greater community and those that we are surrounded by. Because when my son was 12 and about to enter in Canada what's secondary school, I said to him that I encouraged him to get an A in friendship and a C in school, if that's what it took, before he graduated. Because with the climate crises I saw on the horizon and the ecological issues and all the things that you've addressed so well in BBMG's Regenerative Brands report, I said if he did that, he would always have a couch to sleep on. When he was better off, there would always be a friend who would put him up. And he needed to think about that through high school, and what the quality of his relationships were, and what relationships he would take with him into the world of his adulthood. And for me, Yulu's really, really captured that. And Lex has also captured, this ability to understand and empathize. So the social relationships and the value derived from the inherent connection that we can have with others who are similar but also quite different from us is really important to nurture as well. So for me, they're carrying a lot of the wisdom that our societies have maybe forgotten about, and they're trying to embody it and live it and get some encouragement from us and from brands and from leaders to keep that flame alive. So for me, in terms of how I'd complete that sentence, I see a future where people do their best to demonstrate mutual care for all life, whatever their field of economic, social, or environmental action, and also take inspiration from youth who are reminding us what we may be missing or may have forgotten the value of, that they are now very, very aware of. That's the future I want.
Sanjay, I remember in our previous conversations, you talked about how with your son, you encouraged him to get a C in school and an A in friendship. And I immediately walked into the room of our daughter, Paloma, who's in high school. And I said, Paloma, my friend Sanjay just said something I think is really key. I think it's more important to get A in friendship. And, it's fine if you get a C in school. And she smiled and laughed. And I actually think, she's crushing it in school. So way to go, Paloma. But I think the A in friendship has been her true north. And I think, that spirit that you're inviting there is so beautiful and so elegant, that as we navigate all of these paradigm shifts, as we think about the world that we hope for and the world that we want, may we indeed bring that spirit of friendship above all.
Hey, amen to that.
Thank you, Sanjay. It's been an absolute delight to be together. And, we are so grateful for our partnership, our collaboration, and thank you particularly for your contribution to the report, which really helped to set the context and the tone for what we might all do together.
Right on, brother.
All right. Be well, my friend.
You too.
Thanks so much for listening to The Future We Want from BBMG. We've been speaking with Sanjay Khanna, our futurist in residence, and we've been sharing headlines from our new report, Leading Regenerative Brands. You can download the full report for free by visiting bbmg.com/views. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The Future We Want is produced by Liz Courtney. Original music and audio production is by Go Destroy Art. See you in the future.